Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions, deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone out there. Welcome to tonight's Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, right here on your number one network, Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Now, if you're in the UK, we're obviously going to be at the earlier time of 9 p.m. for the next week, maybe 2 weeks, until the American clocks go back. We have to remember that TFR, the brilliant TFR, is based over in the brilliant US of A. So with us putting our clocks back over the weekend, winter time again over here, folks, that means we're going to be on at this earlier time. So with that out the way, with the change of the clocks, went out today to go to the shop, and I am telling you, winter is already here. It was unbelievably cold over here today, and I was reading over the weekend that Snowmageddon, or I don't know what they're calling it, Snowpocalypse, is due to be hitting the UK anytime soon because of cold weather coming down from the Arctic region. Well, I'm telling you, going by the feel of it out there today, it was already here because it's freezing. So if you are in Scotland or the UK, wrap up warm, folks, because that temperature is dipping. But tonight, hopefully, we'll raise the temperature right here on the show, because returning after far, far too long. Okay, we done a show on Friday, but that's not the point. Mr. Anthony Patch is back here joining us tonight. And before we get into things, how are you doing, Mr. Patch? Raring to go, I hope?
Oh, yeah, very good. I'm sorry I'm on my laptop tonight, but yeah, raring to go. Things are good, and yeah, we're going to fall back here, I don't know, in a week or two, like you said, but great to be with you on your earlier hour.
So does it ever get cold where you are over there, Tony? I mean, does the temperature ever dip at all?
Oh, sure. We got a lot of dips over here.
Well, I think you should come over here to experience one of our ever cold winters, because I am telling you, it's like something like Game of Thrones is coming. The long winter is almost upon us. I sound like an article out of the Daily Express. I've probably been reading that newspaper way too much. But, you know, tonight, Tony, we're going to be getting into a whole number of topics. But before we get there, for any of the listeners out there, if you want to check out more of Anthony's work, and he comes to us with a vast knowledge base of all things scientific, and in particular, CERN and quantum computers. He's got a number of books out as well, and you can find them over at his website, www.anthonypatch.com. Now, the website is going through a much needed, and I'm telling you, it's looking great, uplift, facelift, whatever you want to call it. It's a work in progress, but anthonypatch.com. And also, that is where you can get a hold of Entangled magazine as well. And tonight I found a really good place for us to kick off proceedings, because I've made no secret of the fact that I'm reading Dan Brown's new book called Origin. And I'm telling you, this reads like something out of all the shows myself and Anthony and Johnny and the Freaky Friday crew and everyone on the network has done such a great job when it comes to covering the topics of AI and science and religion. Well, I'm a slow kind of reader. I'm halfway through this book now, and page 210, something interesting turned up, and I want to share that with all of you out there, because I often laugh and joke about how even when we try to unwind and unplug from this matrix as it is, steal a quiet hour to ourselves here or there, it just seems to be that the information follows you. Maybe it's synchronicity. Maybe it's because it's in our consciousness, we notice it more. Maybe it was always there in the first place. But Dan Brown, and I love his writing style, and this won't give away any of the plot for any of the book, which I urge you all to read. And just to read this here, it says, as she led the way down the jet's staircase, Ambra breathed deeply, trying to clear her head. The second glass of wine had taken hold, and she regretted drinking it. Stepping down onto the cement floor of the hangar, she faltered slightly and felt Langdon's strong hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Thanks, she whispered, smiling back at the professor, whose 2 cups of coffee had left him looking wide awake and wired. We should get out of sight as quickly as possible, Langdon said, eyeing the sleek black SUV parked in the corner. I assume this is the vehicle that you told me about. She nodded. Edmund's secret love. That's an odd license plate. Ambra eyed the car's vanity plate and chuckled. And on that plate, it said, E-wave. Well, she explained, Edmund told me that Google and NASA recently acquired a groundbreaking supercomputer called D-Wave, one of the world's first quantum computers. He tried to explain it to me, but it was all pretty complicated. Something about superpositions and quantum mechanics and creating an entirely new breed of machine. Anyhow, Edmund said he wanted to build something that would blow D-Wave out of the water. He planned to call his new computer the E-Wave. Obviously, one up and one better from the D-Wave that Geordie Rose and Eric Ladzinski brought to the world. And Tony, I find that quite synchronistic because until I had met you, my good friend, I had never, ever heard of anything called D-Wave. And I imagine a lot of the audience out there have got you to thank for putting D-Wave into the public consciousness. So here's Dan Brown, years later, following on from your books, Tony, your groundbreaking books, it would seem, always ahead of the curve, we joke. But here he is, Dan Brown, this best-selling author that everyone's heard of. It's almost as if he's been listening to us, Tony.
I think that he and Elon Musk must be fans of the show because they keep bringing up the topics that you and I have brought up 3 and 4 weeks ahead of time, or in this case, 2013 is when we first broke it out into the public arena. So, you know, it's been out there. Yep. I think they've been paying attention to you, my friend.
It's quite interesting because the car in question is actually a Tesla X. It's one of the sports model, and Elon had hand-delivered this to his friend in the book, obviously a fictional friend, right enough, but it just made me laugh. It was almost as if Dan Brown sits listening, and I'm not saying he does, folks. I would never be that presumptuous or vain to say that.
I'll say he does.
You see, that's why we make quite a good double act, Tony. It really is, you know. We complement each other well.
I'll take the heat, and you can just pose it.
But there you go, folks. We cannot get away from the D-Wave. And like I say, I personally thank Tony for bringing it to my attention. And now as every month goes by, we're hearing more and more and more. And we're kind of going back in time to where we did start all those years ago when Patch met Baker for the first time here after hearing him on the Clyde Lewis show. Because tonight we're going to be making some, or you're going to be making some really, really, in my opinion, Tony, important connections that the listeners really need to know.
Well, that's true. And again, Friday, when you and I got together, we talked about the CERN to D-Wave connection, and we brought up the article that came out in Futurism that we decided was or labeled as the smoking gun, that definitively in this Futurism.com article laid out the connection between the quantum computing of D-Wave and the search for the Higgs boson at CERN. Now, what they did in this article was they outlined that they were simply utilizing D-Wave's quantum computers to reconfirm the assertion by CERN that they had in fact discovered the Higgs boson back in 2012. So that's the essence of the article, but just the simple fact that the two are openly now being presented as collaborating goes back several months to when you and I first broke the story of the Boltzmann machine being presented at CERN by D-Wave, and that D-Wave were moving towards the utilization, or I should more accurately say, the revelation, because it's been ongoing, the revelation that D-Wave utilizes a Boltzmann machine. Now, that's a mathematical machine. It's not a mechanical machine, but it's referred to as a Boltzmann machine. And as we've outlined, that has to do with recursive neural network, deep machine learning. Now, coming back to CERN and D-Wave, I've written a couple of articles, in fact, several articles about D-Wave in the November issue of Entangled magazine, which will be out on the 1st. And one of the articles is the CERN to D-Wave connection that I just mentioned. Now, the second one, and this probably needs a drum roll, but this is brand new. I shared it with you before the show, Kev, and it is something that you and I sort of hinted at the very first show that we did together right after I was on with Clyde Lewis, as you mentioned. And that is another connection between CERN and D-Wave that no one, to my knowledge, publicly has ever made. So take it away.
Oh, no, Tony, I am never going to steal your thunder on this one, because you were the one that taught all of us back in the day when we were learning all of this for the first time that when we talk about CERN or we talk about D-Wave, never lose sight of the fact that the two go together. So you were the one that first laid out that there would be this connection come the opening of the portal. So I have to give you full credit for leading us up to that rabbit hole in the first place. And when you were describing the actual process of the qubits back at the time, and I briefly looked into how D-Wave works, and then you were describing just what happens in the main ring at CERN, I think I jokingly threw out to you that it's almost as if they're trying to go quantum. Tony, give the listeners the hard truth about what you've discovered or what you're laying out in your latest article.
Well, this is why you and I make such a good team, Kev, is because you're very sharp with the physics and you understand what it is that I'm talking about, and you do your own research and come to your own conclusions that you share with me that I haven't come up with. And so the collaboration between us, if you will, the coalescence, to borrow an old word we've used a lot, is remarkable because we literally operate on the same page, but we oftentimes come up with independent discoveries. This is not so much independent as it is building upon your statement about the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, being quantum. What I'm going to share with the folks here is a very short article, purposefully short, that I wrote for Entangled magazine, due out on the 1st of November. I'm going to go ahead and read it so that you get a sense of some of the things that are in the magazine. So, very quickly, this is entitled CERN and D-Wave Connection. There is an additional connection between the quantum scale, qubit-based computing systems of D-Wave Systems Incorporated and the physics employed within the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, at CERN. Now, here it is. I always give it to you up front, folks. Both are quantum computing systems. That's correct. What is obvious, while it is obvious D-Wave's adiabatic systems are in fact quantum computers, what is not appreciated is the LHC, albeit on a much larger 27-kilometer scale, also operates as a quantum computer. How so, you may ask? A simple examination of their respective components reveals all. D-Wave's qubits, composed of gold and niobium, held in a cryogenic state maintaining the superconductivity of these materials, enabling the acceleration of electrons, charged particles, held to opposing circular trajectories, achieving superposition resulting in zeros also being ones, while ones also are zeros. By co-founder Gordy Rose's own public statements, they are accessing thousands of parallel dimensions. in previous editions of Entangled Magazine, and in this one, I've provided transcriptions of his first declaration made in 2013 relative to the third model comprised of 512 qubits. He indicating at that time they were accessing 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. Now, to the LHC, superconducting magnets composed of niobium and titanium, held in a cryogenic state, maintaining the superconductivity of these materials, enabling protons, ions of lead, and other quantum particles to be held in opposing circular trajectories. Now, here's where it gets interesting in contemplating the consequences of these nearly identical systems. The LHC is likewise achieving superposition of zeros and ones, only on a 27-kilometer scale, as opposed to the chipset-sized qubits of D-Wave systems. Consider also the fact D-Wave is accessing, in a two-way configuration of communications, thousands of parallel dimensions. Now, publicly with their fifth model, the 2000Q, which is on the 2048 chipset, they are accessing over 2 to the 2,000th power of parallel dimensions. How does this compare with the LHC? It is only 1 qubit, albeit a very large one. There are approximately 110 ring-based synchrotron particle accelerators and more under construction. Still more on the drawing board, including CERN's own plans for another 3 times the size of their present machine. What does this mean? Each synchrotron particle accelerator functions as a quantum computer, and like any multiple unit system, they are networked together. In fact, as demonstrated in the preceding article, the CERN to D-Wave connection, each of the now 16 models of D-Wave quantum computers with multiples sold to customers stipulated in this article, they too are networked together so as to prevent conflicts arising between individual units. Okay, we're almost done, folks. Finally, each of the 2 networks, those comprising the synchrotrons, as well as each of D-Wave's units, are conjoined into one worldwide network, a single network accessing and communicating with a near infinite number of parallel dimensions. Staggering, the consequences for mankind. There you go, sir.
And that article is staggering, and it is for this reason. When I first started looking into one of the co-founders of D-Wave, Easy Eric, as I jokingly call him, but his name is Eric Ladzinski. The guy is a boffin. Now, he was explaining how he had come from the world of superconductors into quantum computing. And the reason he'd done that was because he observed quantum effects at the micro scale. Now, to kind of make that clearer for people who maybe aren't as into the world of quantum or all this stuff as myself and Tony, what he went on to describe was a kind of ring, a small, albeit a small ring of metal. Now, within that ring, there was an electrical charge that could travel clockwise and anti-clockwise at the same time. So here we have this tiny metallic ring. Eric Ladzinski basically describing the first model of the qubit. Well, take that to the 27-kilometer scale, and it's exactly the same thing. Because I believe, Tony, maybe you can correct me on this, but that niobium, that I hate saying that word, but I think that was the actual metal that Ladzinski had watched in the laboratory when he was in the superconducting world. And that's also the same kind of magnets and metals that you find in the main ring at CERN.
That is absolutely correct. Yes, they're both superconducting materials. When they're cryogenically cold, in the case of D-Wave, it's colder than outer space. In the case of the LHC, they're cooling the superconducting magnets as well to below temperatures found in outer space. virtually what we're talking about. Remember, we talked about linear accelerators on a chip. Remember that, Kev?
Oh, yes. Very much. In
Okay.
fact, Rebecca in the chat, I'm not sure if she's in there tonight, but she was often posting this little chip that was basically on the end of somebody's finger.
That's correct. And that was developed with the SLAC, Stanford Linear Accelerator facility at Stanford University in California. Now, there are many linear accelerators on chips now, but what we're talking about here is very much the same thing, except a ring-based accelerator in the form of a qubit in a quantum computer. The physics are the same no matter the scale, as above, so below. So we are looking at applying what we see with D-Wave's functionality of their qubits to the functionality of the Large Hadron Collider, in that it also is configured the same way as the contra-rotating electrons within a qubit that result in zeros and ones in superposition. You cannot, therefore, have any different outcome when you have the same construction, same operating mechanisms, the same quantum physics and quantum mechanics applied at the quantum scale also apply with the Large Hadron Collider, because the collider is operating with quantum particles. The only difference is the size of the machine. They're both quantum computers.
They've scaled it up. This is what they've done. And myself and Anthony often have a laugh. It's a tongue-in-cheek laugh, because we're not knocking the science that's coming out of these places. But IBM, for example, they'll get all excited when they talk about maybe 50 qubits strung together. So this one qubit that sits in Geneva, I mean, nothing, right? And Anthony, in his article, gave one kind of theory as to what happens when these are all connected. All these accelerators around the world, 110 he numbered. He said that they'll be used to communicate with that mind-boggling number of parallel realities, parallel dimensions, whatever name you want to put on it. Well, as an alternative to that, and not contrary to it, but another way of thinking about it that popped into my head is, well, 110, that's not too far off the 128. Now, 128 is a significant number when it comes to computing, because that would be your 128K. Well, could it be that they're aiming for 128 particle accelerators? And for particle accelerators, think qubits. And then when you network these qubits, this 180 or the 128 qubits together, then what happens then? Is it for communications? It could possibly well be. Or how about they're actually trying to take this planet to one of these mind-boggling number of dimensions that lie out there? They're literally, possibly, trying to take us quantum. Could that explain for all the metallics that are being sprayed in the air, the almost terraforming of our planet? We speculate a lot about what entities may be coming here, Tony, but maybe we need to flip that 180, and maybe they're preparing the planet for wherever we're going to, where these entities reside.
You know, you're on the right track, my friend, and we're almost to the break, so I'm going to hold my statement to after the break. But recall that 128 number is very significant. You're supposing there are maybe 128 synchrotrons, ring-based accelerators, and they are under construction. And I was only going off, very cursory data. There may, in fact, already be 128, and I will look for that. But that number relates specifically to the very first quantum computer sold by D-Wave, the 128 qubit sold to Lockheed USC at their lab at USC's campus.
Anyone would think myself and Tony have been sitting all day working that so that all strung together perfectly for the break coming up. But Tony, please assure the audience that my day has been absolutely hectic, and even half of the stuff that you sent me, the only reason I knew about it was because our entanglement was at work, and I was bringing up articles that I thought would be new to you, and you were sitting laughing, going, Kev, I sent you an article about that. So This has totally been thrown together, folks, but look how it comes together. Literally going quantum right here on the Kev Baker Show tonight. And if you're on Facebook or Twitter, please let the wider listening audience know that if we're in the UK, we are on at the earlier time of 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. 9/11. What an apt number for a show like mine. You couldn't make this up. But remember to check out Tony's work over at anthonypatch.com. Get a hold of some of his books, because I've been talking about Dan Brown. Well, Tony is an author in his own right, and he trumps Dan Brown by years. D-Wave was in there a long, long time ago. Join us after the break for more on that.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. It is part 2 of tonight's Kev Baker Show with me, Kev Baker, of course, right here on www.tfrlive.com. And tonight I am joined again by Anthony Patch, and we're going back to where it all begun. That's right, folks, we're talking about CERN and D-Wave. And before the break, we were making really good connections between quantum computing and particle accelerators themselves. The qubits at the micro scale in the quantum computers are actually no different to the 27-kilometre ring over in Geneva. Tony was talking about the potential to be communicating with all of these parallel dimensions, while I was throwing out the possibility that they might be trying to take the planet itself quantum. What do I mean? Well, could it be that they're trying to shift us from one dimension to another? It does sound out there, don't get me wrong, and I will be the first to say highly, highly speculative. More so than the communications device. And I say that because when we look at CERN, it is basically an alchemist's wet dream. And I bring that up because you have to go back in history, as Anthony has done time and time again on the show, to demonstrate the fact that what we're looking at with CERN and quantum computers is no different to the magic that was being practiced by the likes of John Dee and Ed Kelly back in the 1400s, I believe, and then more present to the times we're in today, the likes of Aleister Crowley. All these times in history, these elites have been trying to communicate with entities from somewhere else. And that's why I say that when it comes to the communications side of what we're breaking down tonight, I would say, Tony, that's probably where the truth is closer to than my taking the full planet and putting us quantum.
Well, let's define quantum for a second. Quantum in terms of, if the audience is familiar with the typical diagram of an atom, and you're looking at the orbiting pathways of particles, and let's focus on the electron. The electron, much like a planet in the solar system, is circulating around the nucleus, the center point. And as it travels in that circular pathway, if energy is imparted to that electron sufficient to cause a change in that orbit, specifically moving suddenly and directly outward to a wider, larger circular pathway, a larger circumference, that leap from one small circle to a larger circle is what is known as a quantum leap. So that's the origin. It's actually an energy gap. It's an energy jump. So, Kev, if you're talking about the planet going quantum, then I would venture to say that it would require a tremendous amount of energy to change, let's say, the orbit of the planet to a larger circular pathway, if that's their goal, or if they're looking at changing the quantum nature of the planet, meaning its resonant frequency, then it would require a tremendous amount of energy input into the planet itself to change not just the Schumann resonance, but to a larger degree, making that huge leap that quantum leap in excitation by an outside source of energy would result in a quantum leap and a larger orbital pathway. There you go.
Now then, how about this? We'll take it one step further then, Tony. We'll follow the physics here, because our magnetosphere around the planet, that stops us from being bombarded by the cosmic rays and solar radiation. And that would be, for me, a really big energy source if we could harness things like that. And something we find with these particle accelerators, and again, credit to you, man, my physics mentor. You taught me well, but it's not just that you circle or actually get these particles going near to the speed of light in a circular direction by using magnets in this near to freezing conditions. Something else happens when you actually accelerate these particles through magnetic fields, because in no uncertain terms, you're basically replicating that cosmic energy that we're protected from by our magnetosphere. Now, these synchrotronic energies, Tony, you were the one that taught me about this, and I read about it in your book as well, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. But this is basically raw power, raw cosmic energy. And they've got a cloud experiment at CERN where they funnel off some of that cosmic rays, the gamma rays, the X-rays, everything else, to simulate actual cosmic rays bombarding clouds. Now then, again, speculative, but could that be a source of the energy, that synchrotronic energy? Could that be the power source that they need, that you kind of theorized about there?
If we take it from the standpoint that all of the synchrotrons, possibly as many as 128 as you presented, and I'm in agreement with you, if we take those and daisy chain them together and combine their gamma ray and X-ray synchrotron energies and magnetic lines of force, which are 100 times greater than the magnetosphere and the magnetic bands, the toroidal field around the planet, there is that possibility. Now, I've never done the math to actually add up their combined energies in terms of electron volts and the gamma ray and X-ray levels that are produced. But I will say this, without having done the math, it's possible. It's very possible that the daisy chaining the network of all these synchrotrons together so that they are spinning in unison, their particles, and reaching a level of harmonics that achieves simultaneous production at equivalent energy levels of gamma rays and X-rays. Now, not equivalent within the accelerators because they're all different sizes, but when combined into one equivalent energy level of synchrotron energies, you know, Kev, I'm going to have to do the math, but there's a very distinct possibility that could provide enough energy to induce a quantum leap, a quantum shift in the orbit of the planet. Or, if not the orbit, as I said, at least change the resonant frequency of the planet itself to something more conducive to what we've talked about, and that is the terraforming of the planet for a new race of being, the human 2.0.
Absolutely. And when you said harmonics there, that's when I did start to think Schumann resonance. And so much talk about the Schumann resonance, the frequency of the actual planet. And it is changing right now. And you know, Tony, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of laugh here, but this is where we really hate being, because I've dragged you to the theoretical blackboard of physics. Tonight, we're in this segment anyway, I've had you theorizing about what might be going on there. And you know how we just love scientific theories and the blackboard of non-truths, Tony.
Well, I think I'm going to have to ask you for a grant, my friend, if we're going to be theoretical physicists here.
Definitely, we get a free white coat and a grant. But getting back into what I regard as the serious physics of what we were laying out before the break, because again, it ties into information that we have covered in the past, but every time we build another layer, Scotty Lopez talks about the layers of the onion. going in the way to find the truth. Well, tonight we're almost building out the way to give you the bigger picture. And Tony, you've spoke about this CERN and D-Wave being communication devices, and when it comes to CERN in particular, to the abyss, because we know it's located on the ancient site of Apollo's temple, which is literally the abyss. And it's all about the communication side of things and how this ties into the comms. I laid out how we might be going quantum planetary scale, but you're going down the communication side. Explain to the listeners about how this communications works.
Yeah, the essence of it, the origins of the communication is geomancy. Most people are more familiar with the term necromancy, communication with the dead. Geomancy is utilizing the soils, the earth itself, to divine messages from the other side. Geomancy is binary. Binary is computing. Computing is communication with the other side. This has been openly professed by Gordy Rose, as you said in the opening of the show, that they're communicating with parallel dimensions, thousands of them. When you think about quantum computing and you think about the Large Hadron Collider also functioning as a quantum computer, we are talking about, at its basic form, we're talking about geomancy, binary. So folks, when we interact with our computers, whether they're comprised of qubits with quantum computers or transistors, the gate model computers that we are all operating with right now, we are operating with geomantic devices. Now, I'm not saying when you're on your laptop that you're talking to the dead. I'm telling you that the origin of the binary system, computer software, and the design of the hardware to operate it all has its origins in geomancy. Now, in my Entangled magazine, September, October issues, and continuing to the November, I break this down. We also did a conference on September 16th and 17th, especially the 17th, and it's available at anthonypatch.com on demand. Kathleen Urquhart, my co-researcher, and I, on the 17th of September, broke down geomancy and showed you that this is the origins of our communication systems based on computers, binary computers. So, Kev, this is where we're headed with all of this. This is why I present to you that CERN is a communications tool that is exactly like the communication tool that D-Wave has constructed, because they are both based on the binary system of geomancy, communicating with the other side. Go ahead.
And you know, when you look at these quantum computers, I mean, even the most mainstream of videos and articles, they will at some stage, if they know what they're talking about, they will point out the fact that these quantum computers spells the death of encryption as we know it, because it's able to work with absolutely mind-boggling amounts of prime numbers. And this ties into the world of encryption on computers, the computer you're probably on right now. But it's also, if we take that onto the CERN, the D-Wave scale, and what we're talking about with this communication with other entities, then that too, there's a code to be broken there, Tony, isn't there? And maybe all of these daisy chaining of the qubits of the particle accelerators is an attempt to literally brute force attack and break that code.
Absolutely it is, my friend. What we're talking about here is Revelation 9. The angel is cast from heaven and given the key to the bottomless pit. And we've covered this before, but as a review for new audience members, it is my position that the definition of the key to the bottomless pit is a key that is utilized to encrypt information, to create a secret code. You encode using a key, often called a public key, and you use the same key to decrypt the code to get access to the information. My contention is quantum computers and now the LHC and other synchrotrons all networked together as large-scale and small-scale quantum computers, are combining their computing power for the purpose of discovering this key that is necessary to gain access to the information that will tell them how to open beneath CERN, as you pointed out, Kev, open the abyss, open the doorway to the abyss. It is their goal, not intention, it is their goal to open the doorway to the abyss. Now, why would they want to do that? One of the reasons among many that I'll just give you very shortly is they believe this is their, pardon the pun, key to immortality. Go ahead, sir.
No, this literally is what they're trying to do. And, you know, I'll never, ever forget the first time I seen the photograph that myself and Anthony and so many others have referenced so often in the past. And you can find it over at my website, Google Anthony Patch on there in the search box. You'll probably find it at Tony's as well, in one of the many articles he's written on these topics. But there's 4 or 5 of the scientists from CERN back when they were just getting ready to do the first runs. And it was a picture that was out there in the public domain. And they were stood there with a giant key talking about unlocking the secrets of the universe and opening portals to other dimensions. Now, they say a picture speaks 1,000 words, but like Tony says, it's not just an intention, it is one of their desired goals to do this. And it is, Tony, when you look at the CERN facility itself, there's a heck of a lot of great science going on there, but at the very heart of it, it's magic. It's an alchemy machine, just the same as what Dee and Kelly were doing back in the day, just the same as Crowley, same as Parsons, and people really need to appreciate that the two so go together, because I'm sure you'll agree, some of the physics coming out of there, it's groundbreaking, but we can't ever lose sight of that occult underbelly that really everything is built upon.
Yeah, and if people think that this is conjecture on our part, connecting modern science to things like geomancy, necromancy, to, you know, superstitions or secret societies, mystical societies, folks, you just need to do your homework. That's what Kev and I do. We spend all our time researching, and what we tell you are the summation of that research. In short, in brief, there's so much more we can tell you. That's why, you know, Kev contributes articles as well to Entangled Magazine, and it all breaks down. And I want to offer a title to another article in the magazine, which is Quantum Manhattan Project. Now, Kev, what does that conjure up? I use that word on purpose. What does that conjure up in your mind's eye when I say Quantum Manhattan Project?
Well, I mean, basically, if you go back to the time of the Manhattan Project, and you freaked me out, Tony, I'll tell you why you freaked me out. Because talk about entanglements, synchronicities, whatever. I was going to talk about my experience when I think it was a Coast to Coast show I was listening to at the time. That was one of the ones I fell in love with back in the day when my brain turned into a sponge and it just wanted info. And I remember one of the guests on there talking about this magical ritual that they conducted when they were actually testing the nuclear or the atom bombs, the H-bombs and things like this. And it involved Jack Parsons, where he was basically trying to bring about some kind of moon child. Now, that might sound totally out there. What am I talking about? That's exactly what I had, or I felt, when I heard this on Coast to Coast. But as any good researcher or anyone in this truth community should do, don't just take the person's word for it. And I didn't, so I went on to the tinterwebs, as we affectionately call it over here, and I started digging. And this Manhattan Project, as you're saying, Tony, when you say Quantum Manhattan Project or program, this is basically the new version of exactly what Jack Parsons was doing back in the day at the testing grounds in New Mexico.
That is true. And, you know, there is a story that goes with that what they conjured up was a female spirit. I think you know the rest of the story. What was the name assigned to that spirit, my friend?
Now you've got me, Tony.
Hillary Clinton.
Ho, ho, ho. Now, if we do the kind of the math and the date of birth stuff, I mean, does it measure up time-wise? It does?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, even that aside, I mean, how many times, I don't know, but how many times, if people didn't know that piece of information, how many times have we referred to her, not just me and you, but others out there, as being evil personified? How many times? And the way she laughed demonically when Colonel Gaddafi met that fate that we all seen playing out on the mainstream TV. We came, he died. Ha, ha, ha. Tony, you know, I don't even think I had heard that, or maybe I'd forgotten about it because I listened to too much information. But that is really, really interesting on a number of levels, because if they did bring some entity, some almost golem-like creature into the world, well, what better and more fitting a candidate than Hillary Clinton?
Well, it's interesting you say Gollum, because that is what is, going back to Dean Kelly again, they conjured up the Gollum. These are creatures that are created from mud, which is embedded with monoatomic gold. And it is this very same monoatomic gold that practitioners of alchemy utilized when they went to their benefactors, their kings and queens that would fund their research and their lifestyle, and they would claim using monoatomic gold to change lead into gold. The whole mythos surrounding alchemy. So what we're talking about here is Gollum that utilize mud that contains monoatomic gold, which is then utilized to create, if you will, a hybrid, to create a body, which can then be imparted with a spirit from the other side. Again, Dee and Kelly operating in interdimensional communications with fallen angels would obtain an alphabet, mathematical equations that resulted in geometric arrangements of quantum particles. And this is how, through that process of geomancy and necromancy, Dee and Kelly were able to offer in, through these communications, these spirits to inhabit the golem. And they would then defend the kingdom that was the benefactor of Dee and Kelly. So that's kind of the backstory to that whole golem issue. But this is all factual. None of this is conjecture. This is all in the historical record. So there you go, buddy.
And I hope these multiple connections between this old magical alchemical times that we describe and how we can take that into the CERN and D-Wave topic, I hope that really hammers home the connections that do lie between all of this. And, you know, another connection between the alchemy of those days and what we're getting today at CERN is the fact that at one stage, one of the runs over at CERN, they were colliding ions of lead into ions of gold. Now, if nothing else, the symbology of that, Tony, that tells anybody with eyes that know what they're seeing exactly what that machine is.
Yeah, again, it is a huge process of alchemy. The practice is the same, it's only the scale that is different. People need to really understand that. Don't be baffled, don't be wowed by all the glitzy stainless steel and high-powered machinery and superconducting magnets and 27-kilometer ring and all this fantastic stuff. It's all gee whiz factor. Yeah, it's powerful. Yeah, it's expensive, but it has its roots in the most basic process, and that is geomancy. And then it moves out from there.
You know, we often talk about how Hollywood mirrors reality. And there's one movie that we can go back to where basically all of what we were talking about there with the Gollum type stuff and the Manhattan Project and everything else is a film by Roman Polanski. And Roman Polanski was one of the first perverts that was rightly outed over in Hollywood. And that's why I find it quite synchronistic, quite timely that we mention this tonight, because in 1968, he directed a psychological horror film called Rosemary's Baby. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen Rosemary's Baby, the film chronicles the story of a pregnant woman who suspects that an evil cult want to take her baby for use in their rituals. Talk about art mirroring life, or is it life that mirrors art? They hide things in plain sight, Tony. They truly do.
Yes, indeed they do. We have about a minute to go here, and I just wanted to reinforce something more about monoatomic gold. Going back to the Egyptian times in which we had the mummification of pharaohs and others and their offspring, monoatomic gold was referred to as the sacred fire, and it was utilized to preserve DNA. And therefore, when I mentioned the opening of the bottomless pit, one of the reasons for doing that was seeking immortality as a reward for doing that. This all ties into the use of monoatomic gold, as you said, when they collided ions of lead. They did that as a tip of the hat. That was more of a, let's say, a sarcastic gesture to the rest of the world that, yes, we're practicing alchemy here. But they definitely will employ monoatomic gold at CERN, and we covered that before. We're going to go right to the break.
Absolutely, and you know, the chat room on fire. They're following along with this tonight. Epic. He says, I theorize that gold is needed for magic. It's why it's so sought after. I'll get Anthony's thoughts on that after the break.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Our number 2 right here on tonight's Kev Baker Show on your number one network, www.tfr Live. I want to thank all of you for coming along to Truth Frequency Radio tonight. You may be tuning into the stream over at iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live. I've got the TuneIn Radio app on my phone myself. I love using that when I'm out and about. You can take TFR everywhere you go. And that, along with all the great shows on here, that's all coming together to make us your number one network. So a big shout out to Chris and Cherie Geo for putting all of this together. And somebody else who works tirelessly for the network is our very own Lucky. And speaking of Lucky, she will be here with Dr. Brooks Agnew right after the Kev Baker Show tonight, right here on this network. So as Whistler loves to say, dinny touch that dial. And speaking of Johnny Whistles, he'll be back with us possibly tomorrow night or the next night, but he's got a couple of days off coming up. So I'm going to twist Johnny's arm, make sure he joins us for those shows. And before we get into it tonight, or back into it with Anthony Patch, don't forget, right here, tomorrow, October the 31st, at 9 p.m. in the UK, 5 p.m. on the East Coast, 2 p.m. on the West Coast, I'll be joined by Scotty Lopez, hopefully Johnny Whistles, and the very, very special Duncan Campbell. Now, Duncan was a guest on Freaky Friday just a couple of weeks ago, and he blew the Woo Crew's mind. Scotty Lopez has given him an instruction sheet. Bring Uber Woo. And he's promised us it's going to be 1,000 times anything we've ever heard before. So that will be our Halloween special right here on the show tomorrow night. No witches, no clowns. Just me, Scotty Whistles, and the brilliant Duncan Campbell. So then, back into tonight's quantum connections between CERN, D-Wave, and the planet itself. And before the break, brilliant question or brilliant statement coming from the chat room, Anthony. And that was that Epic was saying, you know, all of this gold makes you wonder why it's so valuable. Maybe it is that it can extend life, stuff like that. And I've always wondered just why it is. I mean, look at all the gold rumours you hear. Fort Knox, no gold left in there. 9/11, all the gold that was stolen from there. the market's rigged to keep the price of gold down, even though it's so high anyway. I mean, what is it with gold, Tony?
Well, for one, and we're going to go to this in a little bit, can anyone say Chinese food? No, the gold is not in Chinese food, but we're going to be talking about China, because China literally has the market cornered on all the physical gold on the planet. Now, way back in 2013, when I was writing Covert Catastrophe, I cited in that book that at that time in 2013, up until that date, on average, the Chinese were purchasing 180,000 metric tons of gold every year. So by now, they have virtually all of the physical gold under control. They have all of ours, the United States. They have Germany's, certainly, which was stockpiled in New York City with the Federal Reserve and mysteriously could not be returned to Germany. Anyway, what's the deal with gold? Gold is an elementary particle in terms of the origins of the universe. If you want to talk Big Bang, yeah, go ahead and talk Big Bang, but I don't adhere to that. A primordial element is what gold is. If you want to think of it as perhaps the singularity to the universe, and that's one way of looking at it. Everybody knows that it is the best conductor of electricity. If we take it from that physics basis, then I would say that the reason that it is considered sacred fire and that it preserves DNA, more specifically, it preserves information, more specifically, it preserves the conductive pathways of light, more specifically, photons. Photons carry information. DNA is comprised of DNA made up of information arranged in patterns, in codes, in sequences. In order to maintain the conductive pathways for this information that is carried by photons, you must have a good conductor. And that's what gold is. There you go, buddy.
There you go. And I still find it intriguing that even when you go back to ancient Egypt, as Tony was saying before the break, they were so fascinated with this gold as well. So then, let's move on to the next topic. And before the break, Anthony, you mentioned something called Quantum Manhattan Project. And I know this is something that you have written about for this month's Entangled magazine that people can get at anthonypatch.com. I believe it's on Amazon as well, because not just an e-mag anymore, get it in paper. I know, so old school, but I love reading things that are actually still printed, Tony. And some people, us older ones out there, not that I'm getting too old right enough, we prefer that old school approach. So the fact that Entangled has gone into print as well, just brilliant stuff.
Well, my thanks go out to my publisher, SE Studios, our good friends Robbie and Cheryl Spencer, who provide the music for my show on Fridays, and they put together and publish Entangled magazine every month, and they've also posted it to Amazon, available in full color or in black and white, as you mentioned, Kev. So tip of the hat to Robbie and Cheryl, because I can't do it at all myself, and they are extremely talented and very supportive of all of the work that you and I do, Kev. So Chinese, here we go. We talked about gold. Well, now we're talking about a new arms race, folks. Now, our audience is very tuned in, not just the TFR, but they do their own research, and they're good critical thinkers. So this may be old news to some people, but here's what I'm going to lay out for you. It's just a teaser. I won't go through the whole article. The military-industrial scientific complex envelops every discipline of mankind. Quoting Arthur Herman, who leads the technology and defense program at the Hudson Institute, quote, "The point is they," referring to the Chinese as outlined below, "they are some distance from that quantum supremacy threshold. We need a Manhattan Project style funding focus in order for a national quantum initiative to succeed." end quote. Herman referring to the World War II era program to produce the first nuclear weapon. Now, I'm going to summarize very quickly the article that I wrote for the November Entangled magazine. They are creating a quantum computing arms race. I dispute that in this article, and I'm going to cut to the chase, as I always do, Kev. The Chinese and the United States government are not at war with each other in a quantum arms race. They are collaborating. You and I said this many weeks ago. They are collaborating. The Chinese are building the infrastructure. They are building the quantum communications system. D-Wave is providing the quantum computers to operate on that internet, if you will, that quantum encrypted, secure communication system. Now, I will add this. To work with D-Wave, the Chinese have announced that they are going to build a $10 billion quantum computing center. Now, this comes on the heels of them recently completing and proving quantum entanglement communications utilizing a quantum satellite to transmit ultra-secure data, inaugurating a 1,243-mile quantum link between Shanghai and Beijing. So there's no quantum race going on here. They're trying to stir up the fear within the American taxpayer to put more money into quantum computing with the specter of a quantum-type arms race between the United States and the Chinese. Folks, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't exist. There is no conflict between the Chinese and the United States, nor the European countries for that matter, because they are all involved in quantum computing and encrypted quantum communications. There you go, sir.
And you know, if you do want to kick off one of these arms races like we had during the Cold War, and like they justified recently with all the countries stocking up on armaments when, air quotes, the war on terror was being fought against the guys in black pajamas over in the Middle East. Well, they always have to build up some kind of enemy, some kind of threat. And it's no mistake, or it's not any coincidence then that in the past couple of months, myself and Anthony brought you the story, again, all adding to this theatre that there is some kind of conflict on the horizon, when Mad Dog Mattis, General Mattis from the White House, attended Silicon Valley and said, you know, we really need to get our finger out here. We need to catch up. We're falling behind when it comes to quantum. And that's hilarious when you know the actual backstory with NASA and Google and all these other companies in the US with their D-Wave systems. Now, that's how they're kind of hyping it up. That's how they're going to justify it. And there is going to be a quantum's arms race, if you want to put it that way. But to prove that they are all working together, how about this, Tony? Because it wasn't that long ago that we heard about Volkswagen and their hookup with D-Wave. Now, they've actually been provided with the latest model of the D-Wave in the meantime. But what they actually done was they hooked up with Volkswagen, and what they did was they run a traffic flow algorithm on a quantum computer with encouraging results. Now, that's all good and well, but where was it they ran this actual test? Where was it the D-Wave was taken to actually do all of this? Well, it just happened to be in Beijing, China. That's a very good way of having a kind of reason to have the D-Wave team going to China to work on their kind of traffic algorithms. But isn't it a really good way to take your hardware over to somewhere to make sure it's all compatible with the new quantum infrastructure that's been built? Example, I was lucky enough to go to MacDill Air Force Base over in Florida during my time in the military. Now, on the days we were working there, it was 3 days, 3 nights, and 3 days of drunken debauchery, going to Disneyland and things like that. But the reason we were there was to make sure that if anything kicked off in a wartime situation, because we would be allies, obviously, well, we had to make sure that our equipment and our crypto would work hand in hand with the American work or equipment and their crypto. So it stands to reason to me that at some point you have to do these tests, Tony. And what better way to dress it up than sorting out Beijing's traffic problem? But here we have the D-Wave from the West working with the people in the East. Again, these two sides are meant to be fighting against each other, we're told. It's just like the space station with Russia up there all the time with us. It's one level we are at war, and then this other level we're all cooperating together.
Yeah, I think you're brilliant, my friend, because, again, you're revealing the cover story, which is so typical in espionage, but the cover story of traffic patterns. Yeah, Volkswagen said that when they purchased the 2000Q, which is on the 2048 chipset from D-Wave. They want to call it that. Let's go back in history. Let's go back to 2010 with the prototypes and the testing of the prototypes by D-Wave. They said that they were going to use the quantum computers for facial recognition and for traffic flow computational problems. They based this whole traffic flow story on their conjecture that the programming of their computers was based upon what is called the traveling salesman hypothesis. That is how they got to the point of programming the computer with what they call combinatorial optimization. What is the optimal route for a traveling salesman to travel within a city or a village that is the most efficient route of travel when he's knocking on one door after another? So that's their cover story. That's what they will tell you. It's about traffic flow for Volkswagen and facial recognition and traffic patterns for their prototypes back in 2010. They keep singing the same song over and over again. It has nothing to do with traffic flow patterns. That's the cover story. What they did, as you pointed out, Kev, was they took a D-Wave over there, they hooked it up to their internet, if you will. It is specifically a quantum entangled system of communications. Now, I'm going to read you from my article. China has held up their end of the collaboration by demonstrating its space-based quantum satellite dubbed Mischius on September 29, 2017, when the head of the Chinese Academy of Sciences held a quantum entangled video conference with an Austrian scientist over a distance of 4,630 miles, fully encrypted, fully unbreakable, even if one employs a transistor-based classical supercomputing system such as China's own world's fastest supercomputer, the Sunway Taihu Lite. What I'm saying here, folks, is it's all smoke and mirrors. There's no need for an arms race. All they want to do is justify the spending of more money for the military, industrial, and therefore scientific complex. Go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. And, you know, when it comes to quantum computing and things like that, Tony, it really is like the space industry. Like I was saying before, on one level, they would have the world believe that the likes of Russia and the US and the UK were all on the brink of World War III. Yet at another level, and we see this at CERN all the time as well, and again in space, we find that they're all working together on scientific projects. And it seems to me that quantum computing is the latest kind of branch where this is very, very evident indeed. And like I was saying, with Mad Dog Mattis going to Silicon Valley and really banging the war drums, that for me, again, just pure theatre. And in the weeks and months that lie ahead, I'm sure we'll be hearing more and more theatre building up this faux enemy on the horizon.
Yeah, and one last piece of propaganda. I'll tell you, the November issue is all about AI and quantum computing. And it is all about debunking the propaganda that is being pumped out surrounding AI. So I'm going to give you another quote here. Once again, quoting Herman Arthur Herman, who leads the technology and defense program at the Hudson Institute. The point is, they, meaning the Chinese, are some distance from that quantum supremacy threshold. Still, Herman called for U.S. policymakers to focus hard on the quantum challenge. Quote, we need a Manhattan Project-style funding focus in order for a national quantum initiative to succeed. End quote. I'll tell you what, folks, this is pure propaganda, as I said. These are pure lies being foisted upon the average Joe bag of donuts walking down the street out there who has no clue about any of this because it's not presented in the mainstream. And when it is, it's always done in smoke and mirrors fashion. So Kev and I, we do the research. We put it out in Entangled Magazine. We put it out on Kev's show and my show so that you get the real scoop on what's going on behind the scenes. And then you can talk to Joe Bag of Donuts and say, it's all smoke and mirrors. Don't believe it, and don't give them your hard-earned dollars.
Well,
there you go, sir. Mr.
Patch, and somebody who's equally as geeky, and I use geek as a very affectionate and endearing term, is Mr. Scotty Lopez. How you doing, Scott? Joining us here for this conversation we're having tonight. This will be right up your street, brother, because we've been talking about how CERN it connects to quantum computers and how when you look at CERN itself, that ring-based accelerator, no different from the qubits that go into superposition and do all of those crazy quantum things. So this is going to be right up your street, Scott.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry I'm fashionably late today, but no, it's good stuff, you know.
And Tony was just getting into the fact that right now they're almost hyping that there's going to be a quantum, if you want to think about it, a quantum arms race, military industrial complex. They'll hype up the threat from China, vice versa. And I was describing how we had the D wave from the Western kind of allies going over to China under the guise of working a traffic algorithm to fix out the traffic flow of Beijing. But in reality, the chances are they were probably just making sure that the Western hardware fitted like a glove with the Eastern kind of software and all the other kind of infrastructure that they're building right now. We've heard of the quantum entanglement via satellites from space and everything else. And Scott, I mean, if we do think of it this way, we've got the US or Canada, should I say, with the D-Wave computer. We go to China, we have the quantum entangled communications, stuff like that, the infrastructure. And over here in the UK recently, I think we're starting to see where we fit into this kind of trifecta of power or shenanigans or whatever title you want to put on it, this quantum's arms race, because over here, we're very much into the AI side of things. We spoke about DeepMind many, many times, and that really is at the forefront of AI, from what I can see anyway. And over here, just recently, we had the UK government suggesting that we need an AI council, not for regulation, though, just for actually producing more and more scholars coming out of school, going into university, that will be able to go and work for companies like DeepMind and to keep us at the very forefront, the tip of the spear, as myself and Tony like to say. So it could well be that we're seeing London and the UK emerging as the software wing for this new system.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking about this the other week, right? And, you know, this kind of goes back to the whole synergistic thought patterns. We always kind of have these entangled thought patterns. But I was thinking about that, too. I'm like, you know, what we're seeing is an arms race. It really is. It's an arms race of quantum and artificial intelligence. You know, during the Cold War, the arms race was all nuclear, right? You know, who could have the biggest nuclear arsenal? Well, you know, that's no longer necessary anymore. And, you know, wasn't it Putin that came out and he basically said that, you know, whatever country is the leader in AI will be basically the dominant force in the world? And, that kind of raised a lot of people's eyebrows when he came out and said that. But he's right. He's absolutely right. So, you also got to look at Russia, too. I mean, they're heavily invested in this also. And Putin seems to really realize this.
That's why I love this guy, Tony. I really do. Unbeknown to him. And Scott, what we were discussing just before you joined the show there, and I know you weren't listening because you've been busy. You're talking about the nuclear arms race and everything else. Well, Tony entitled his article that will be in Entangled this month, The Quantum Manhattan Project. So yes, the entanglements work well with this one, Tony. They really do.
Well, I know you guys talked about meta-learning. So after the break, let's talk about meta-learning AI, because I agree with Putin and with you guys. AI is the largest, as Elon Musk said, the largest, most significant existential threat to the human race. So we should be talking about meta-learning and how AI is now creating more AI machines itself.
Absolutely. And this was something that we discussed last week briefly, Scott, when we were talking about these AIs self-replicating and self-learning. And we got into the state of nirvana as well. Something else that Anthony, in his hiatus, without any prompting from us, has wrote about as well. So this is going to be absolutely brilliant. But before we go to the break, remember to check out Anthony's work over at anthonypatch.com. I can't stress enough how important it is for you just to head on over there, check things out. And the best example I can use to indicate just how far ahead of the curve this guy is his book 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. That one really sticks in my mind because so much of what we talk about today and back up with articles that are coming out just as we speak present day, it was back in that book. And I believe that was, 2013 or something, Tony?
2014 with Covert Catastrophe in 2013.
And like I said, tonight, Dan Brown just started putting in the D-Wave into his latest book. You could have read about that years ago from Mr. Patch. And Scott, 30 seconds before break, but you'll be joining me tomorrow night for our Halloween special with Duncan Campbell. Is it going to be good or is it going to be good, Scott?
Duncan said that it was going to be woo times infinity.
Oh, see, this is what we're talking about. So tomorrow, folks, dim the lights, get your tinfoil hats on, because we are going to hit the Halloween. Does that work? Yeah, Halloween. Folks will feel it.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gents. Final part of tonight's Kev Baker Show right here on TFRlive.com. And coming up after the break, Lucky and Dr. Brooks Agnew, they'll be having their Halloween special on Quantum Connections. So look forward to a very spooky opening to that show indeed. We're getting back into tonight's information with Anthony Patch, and now we've been joined by Scotty Lopez. The three geeks ride again. It really is. We're getting into CERN, D-Waves, quantum computing, and the quantum arms race. Now, before the break, we were getting a little taste of one of Anthony's latest articles called the Quantum Manhattan Project. And in that, he quotes a gentleman that's talking about an arms race, a quantum arms race. Now, Scott, you found an article, not the New York Times one, but the one that linked to that. And there was very similar language in that article. And this was coming from earlier this year, which was July 29th, right?
Yeah, because I thought I had heard this before, right? This is sort of a Manhattan Project for AI. And, you know, when Tony brought it up, or when you guys brought it up, I was like, I've seen this before. So I did a quick search, and yeah, there's a article on it's called it's wavefunctions.fieldofscience.com, and the title of the article is a Manhattan Project for AI, question mark, and it links to an op-ed that was written in the New York Times by a neuroscientist and AI researcher named Gary Marcus. And basically his whole op-ed was talking about how artificial intelligence is stuck right now, and what we need to move it forward or accelerate it is basically a Manhattan Project style funding, international funding for an AI project. So once again, I mean, that this is like a talking point that they're really putting out, that everybody needs to invest in artificial intelligence because this is the way of the future, and this is what needs to be done, and that countries need to start dumping money into AI research and AI development. It's really interesting.
I find it really interesting, Anthony, because this is obviously the line that we're going to hear pushed from now on in. And again, in an attempt to justify all the funding that's going to go into this, and the reason they'll give for the funding is this perceived threat. And they'll say that Putin was right. The first kind of side that does get that all knowledgeable, all intelligent, I'm not going to say conscious AI, then they will basically dominate the planet. And that's a really good kind of bogeyman to put out there to justify, or to make people scared enough to justify the vast quantities of money that's going to go into this, right?
Yeah. And it's not just the military specter that they're putting out there in terms of conflict, but we've all heard of the Internet of Things. Now, here's a new paradigm shift. When we think of manufacturing of products, let's take an automobile. Let's take a Tesla car. Now, you revealed many months ago, and I praised you for this, that he would have an AI system on board his Tesla automobiles that would be encrypted, and that it would be unbreakable, that the car, its computer systems, its communication systems as well, because it's sending and receiving data, the car is, that would be an encrypted system based on quantum entanglement. And I totally agreed with you many months ago. But let's take this example of manufacturing of a product and AI and look at it differently. Let's do a 180. Suppose you take the premise that everything that is manufactured must first incorporate AI. I don't care if you're building a car or a refrigerator, or as we joked many months ago with Johnny Whistles, building a artificially intelligent toilet. Okay? And we're not kidding, folks. We covered that. The point here, the paradigm shift, is that before you build anything new, it must be built around an AI system. Now, AI has many layers, many levels, many forms, but everything in the Internet of Things must be connected. Therefore, it must start in its design phase with AI.
And Tony, that ties in with something I heard on one of these it was a show with the talking heads on, the so-called experts talking about all of this, and they were talking about AI in business, and they were saying that any businesses that are even late to adopt AI into their business model, and they're essentially just going to fall by the wayside. And any new businesses that are starting up, they really have to incorporate that AI from the start to have any kind of a chance of getting up off the ground.
Yeah, and again, I would urge people to do their research on AI, because there's very basic rudimentary AI, and then there is AI at the tip of the spear, as we say, and you said it before the break, Kev. There is AI that is recursive in the sense that it is building more complex AI machines itself. It is self-replicating AI systems. So take that away.
No, this is where it starts getting really creepy. And this is real world. This isn't the sci-fi stuff that I love to absorb and kind of get engrossed in, because we're talking here about machine learning software that has gone and learned how to replicate itself. Now, this is coming from Google, folks, so we really need to pay attention to this, because it's really, when I tell you what it can do, if it doesn't shock you, then you haven't heard me saying it correctly, because it says here in brief, before we get into Tony's article and Scott's take on this as well, that Google designed its AutoML project to be an artificial intelligence that could help humans create other AI systems. Well, that's not so bad. But then the next sentence is what really should hit you between the eyes, because it says now AutoML can do that, and it's creating more powerful, efficient systems than human engineers can. So not only has it learned how to do that, it's reproducing itself at a scale and a level and ability that human engineers could never, ever do. And this is where you start getting into this obsolescence kind of argument, and Elon Musk with us being reduced to domesticated cats, because when you see the AI doing things like this, Tony, then it really does stand to reason that when they do have this all-conquering, all-powerful AI, it's going to be the death of scientific invention for us humans anyway, because anything that we can come up with or ever have come up with or ever could come up with, it's going to be child's play to these AIs that just keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah, let me quote real quickly from my article, then I want to toss it over to Scotty. These results are meaningful because even at Google, few people have the requisite expertise to build next-generation AI systems. It takes a rarefied skill set to automate this area, but once it is achieved, it will change the industry. Quote, today, these are handcrafted by machine learning scientists, and literally only a few thousands of scientists around the world can do this, said Google CEO Sundar Pichai. He said, we want to enable hundreds of thousands of developers to be able to do it, end quote. So they're hard on it. This is no, science fiction. Scotty, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, we sort of talked about this, I think, what was it, last week, whenever I was on Kev's show, and we were kind of discussing these adversarial AIs and the the point of, if you have like two adversarial AIs battling each other and one ends up winning, right? And there's nothing else for this AI to battle, basically, or to be put up against, what's its only solution? Well, it's probably going to create an adversary, because its whole mission is to be an adversarial AI. So it's going to want to basically go against something. That's its mission, and then to win. And so once it wins, I mean, what's the point? What's its point of being there? So yeah, you definitely see this movement of artificial intelligence being able to replicate itself. I would assume that would be the logical step an adversarial AI would take if it had nothing to go against.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, because if it is recursively adversarial and it has no ability to collaborate, it has no ability to reach a compromise with its opponent, it literally is a battle to the death in terms of computational processing. Now, if people think that this is isolated, this all ties back into the quantum computers of D-Wave. And I just want to very quickly say that what they're shooting for is the equivalency in AI of the human brain. In this article that I've published on meta-learning AI, I break it all down as far as the equivalency to a human brain. But understand that it's not just D-Wave in a vacuum, and it's not just the Chinese in a vacuum, and it's not just Google in a vacuum. They are all working in a collaborative fashion together around the world, and the ultimate of that is the sentient world simulation that we talked so much about. But I want to take it back again to another point of origin, and that is, of course, CERN. CERN is the origin of AI. And I won't elaborate more than that. Go ahead.
Oh, a little teaser there from Mr. Patch. But we were talking before about how, on one hand, all of these countries are at loggerheads, ready for World War III, China, Russia, against the West, right? But in reality, when it comes to the science of things, that they're all working together. And it's the same when we come down to the micro level of corporations, because there you have Google working on their Auto ML. Now they're going to have to use chipsets for all of that stuff. And just so happens that Facebook and Intel are joining forces for artificial intelligence. So what is it that Facebook and Intel are doing? Two separate companies. Well, they're coming together and they're working on something called Nirvana. Not Nirvana, that utopic state, but Nirvana. And I'm sure there's a bit of word magic going on there, folks. And it says it's Intel's newest processor designed specifically for AI and deep learning. The chip is an integral part of multiple projects that are expected to help Intel achieving 100 times better AI performance by 2020. And it goes on to talk about the birth of the Nirvana neural network processor. So, Tony, when it comes to Google or any of these companies, and I'll come to you, Scott, I see you've got a one in there, we can see that all of these companies in the background are working together on the actual, well, this is the hardware side of things. Really, really intriguing. And that word, Scott, Nirvana, it's far too close to Nirvana for me. And this is exactly what I'd love to take us into a utopic state under a godhead AI, right?
Well, I do find it interesting that it's Facebook and Intel teaming up. So it makes you wonder, all these social media accounts on Facebook, all of this data being collected on everybody who has a...
When it comes to Facebook, I mean, what people need to appreciate is that is just one data mining conglomeration, because all the AI, what it always seeks and it desires and it needs to learn is raw data. And what better way than something with billions of users, Scott, sharing their every second thought, photograph, location? It's a data heaven, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, think about all of that data. I mean, how many? The massive amount of data, from everybody who has a Facebook profile and everything they've ever posted, every picture they've ever posted, every video they've ever posted, everything. You would need some sort of AI system to crunch all that data, to filter through all that. And what better way than to shove all that data through the Nirvana microchip?
Hey, Kev, let me just jump off from that point, because, Scotty, you said crunching the data. There's a smoking gun that Kev and I presented in the connection between D-Wave and CERN. We presented on my show on Friday, and that is the crunching of data that it results from the collision of particles at the Large Hadron Collider, and this was tied to reconfirming the Higgs boson. It was a test, just to test D-Wave. That's the smoke and mirror story. The point here is data crunching. And when D-Wave is crunching data coming out as a waterfall of data streams from the high luminosity data that it results from these collisions, that is pattern recognition, much like facial recognition. Yep. Okay? And that is for teaching the AI system that D-Wave is responsible for. And by teaching it the pattern recognition of such vast amounts of data coming out of the LHC, it is then capable at a much higher level of crunching data that comes in from content providers, which is social media. This all goes to the building of the density of the granularity of data that provides data in the building out of the holographic projection system known as a sentient world simulation. There you go.
If I was a conspiracy theorist, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and we know that CERN was very, very integral at the foundation level of the internet coming into reality, and we look at what the internet is today, it's been described as a modern day library of Alexandria. Billions upon billions of different web pages with information on absolutely everything you can think of under the or in the universe. And then, of course, you've got that feed or all those feeds from social media with everyone pouring in everything to that every second of every day, every single keystroke around the world, billions upon billions every second, let alone every hour of every day. One might suspect, that the internet itself, its inception, it was built for this very purpose, as that library of Alexandria, only not for us. It was never intended to enlighten or teach us anything. It may well have done. I'm not criticizing the internet in any way because I personally have learned so much from there. But when you look at it on the whole, all of those billions of pages in different languages around the world, there's an argument to be made, Anthony, that it was all designed for the consumption of this AI that they're building.
Well, from my perspective as a Christian, this is the mark of the beast system, the Internet of Things. If your devices are embedded with AI, you cannot buy or sell those products because the products being artificially intelligent will know whether you have the mark of the beast, which is the key that allows you access to the system of buying and selling that requires the mark of the beast in order to purchase an AI embedded product. That's why everything in that paradigm shifting statement will be embedded with AI, because it is the mark of the beast system predicated upon the origins of the internet from CERN. And it is therefore the origin of all AI systems. Comes right out of that laboratory.
And Scott, I was watching a video from our friends today, Aaron and Melissa, Truth Stream Media. And then one of the videos I was watching, I'm not sure if I think it was today's one, but they were talking about the chip that we all now have in our credit cards and debit cards that we're asked for every single time we make any kind of purchase. It's almost common kind of phrase now when you buy something, have you got a chip and pin? And that in itself, it's almost like they're laughing at us by giving us that literal chip system, because many people think it's going to be a microchip under the skin or something like that. But literally, we are all chipped already, be it our SIM cards and our mobiles, which we can also pay with the chip, and our credit cards, bank cards, all chipped. Every single one must have that chip, Scott.
Yeah, and this goes to the push for a cashless society, right? Because if you don't have cash, then what's your only alternative? Oh, you got to have that card, that card with the chip in it. So,
and again, it's not for convenience. It's not so that we don't have to carry about cumbersome change. They'll dress it up that way, but of course, it's all about control. Because at any time, then they can.
At any time, if you don't play ball, they can just deactivate your card or deactivate your chip, and then you're screwed. So, I've always said this too. That it's basically a beast system, right? You either accept it, and then you're able to function within society, or if you don't accept it, then you're pretty much there's no recourse. You can't go buy food, you can't buy products, you can't do any transactions. You just you basically become an outcast, right? And that's all part of the whole Agenda 21 thing, to push people in these mega cities. It's easier to get people, integrated into this system when they're all packed together in a mega city, and the rural areas are just going to be like a wasteland. The government will probably rewild it. It'll all be under federal control, and anybody who's out there is going to be considered trespassing on government property or something like that, and you're not going to be able to function out there really, without without them hassling you or rounding you up and throwing you into the mega city. So that's the direction they're taking. That's where they're going with all this, and this is all part of it. The whole virtual reality stuff coming out. It's getting people acclimated to it. Augmented reality. Now you got the artificial intelligence. That's all going to be intertwined into it, and before you know it, I mean, everybody's going to be in the system, right? I mean, just right now, everybody's in the system almost. Like I had said, just what was it last week? Even people considered, under the poverty line, that you would consider poor in this country, they have a cell phone, they have internet access, so they're still plugged into this. It's only in the most like third world African countries that really don't have access to internet, and we see this push from Zuckerberg to give them free internet, right? So even in an absolutely completely impoverished third world country, people will still have access to the internet. I mean, just think about how crazy that is. And so it doesn't matter what your financial status is. You're still going to have access to that system, and you're going to be plugged into that system.
It's the same with the 5G, Tony, isn't it? Because when you look into that, and over here in the UK anyway, they're determined to take it to the most rural of locations. And when you look into 5G, they tell you it's for all of the connections that's going to be required from all of the gadgets on the Internet of Things. I mean, I come from a very rural Highland village up near Inverness, and there's never going to be a demand for that kind of network. Yet they're determined to get this into every corner, absolutely every corner of the country. And like Scott says, it's all part of integrating us into this beast system.
Let me ask you kind of an odd question. In your hometown, your home village, did they have to convert from incandescent light bulbs to LED?
Over here in the EU, they got rid of all the old light bulbs and gave us the new ones, yeah.
You know why they went to LED?
Go for it.
Their 5G relay points.
You hear that silence there? Now, I can go with that because in Maplin, I'm not sure if you guys have Maplin in the US, but it's a electronics store. And they sell expensive light bulbs that offer to basically boost your Wi-Fi signal throughout the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking this is the same technology, right?
That's it, baby. Every LED receives and transmits 5G.
Wow. Now, we're almost out of time, Anthony and Scott. You'll be back with me tomorrow night. But, Tony, plug the websites. When's the magazine available, etc., etc.?
Yep, anthonypatch.com, Entangled Magazine, the on-demand for the Full Spectrum Dominance Conference is there. My books are there. The magazine will be out November 1st. It's always published on the 1st of the month, and I appreciate your support so we can keep doing these the research and the shows.
Well, this has been absolutely brilliant to have you back on tonight. So you'll be back on Wednesday and tomorrow night on KBS. It's our Halloween special with Duncan Campbell, wherever you are. I'm
going to share with the folks here is a very short article, purposefully short, that I wrote for Entangled Magazine, due out on the 1st of November. I'm going to go ahead and read it so that you get a sense of some of the things that are in the magazine. So, very quickly, this is entitled CERN and D-Wave Connection. There is an additional connection between the quantum scale, qubit-based computing systems of D-Wave Systems Incorporated and the physics employed within the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, at CERN. Now, here it is. I always give it to you up front, folks. Both are quantum computing systems. That's correct. What is obvious, while it is obvious D-Wave's adiabatic systems are in fact quantum computers, what is not appreciated is the LHC, albeit on a much larger 27-kilometer scale, also operates as a quantum computer. How so, you may ask? A simple examination of their respective components reveals all. D-Wave's qubits, composed of gold and niobium, held in a cryogenic state maintaining the superconductivity of these materials, enabling the acceleration of electrons, charged particles, held to opposing circular trajectories, achieving superposition resulting in zeros also being ones, while ones also are zeros. By co-founder Gordy Rose's own public statements, they are accessing thousands of parallel dimensions. In previous editions of Entangled magazine, and in this one, I've provided transcriptions of his first declaration made in 2013 relative to the third model comprised of 512 qubits. He indicating at that time they were accessing 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. Now, to the LHC, superconducting magnets composed of niobium and titanium, held in a cryogenic state maintaining the superconductivity of these materials, enabling protons, ions of lead, and other quantum particles to be held in opposing circular trajectories. Now, here's where it gets interesting in contemplating the consequences of these nearly identical systems. The LHC is likewise achieving superposition of zeros and ones, only on a 27-kilometer scale, as opposed to the chipset-sized qubits of D-Wave systems. Consider also the fact D-Wave is accessing, in a two-way configuration of communications, thousands of parallel dimensions. Now, publicly with their fifth model, the 2000Q, which is on the 2048 chipset, they are accessing over 2 to the 2,000th power of parallel dimensions. How does this compare with the LHC? It is only 1 qubit, albeit a very large one.
New breed of machine. Anyhow, Edmund said he wanted to build something that would blow D-Wave out of the water. He planned to call his new computer the E-Wave. Obviously, one up and one better from the D-Wave that Geordie Rose and Eric Ladzinski brought to the world. And Tony, I find that quite synchronistic because until I had met you, my good friend, I had never, ever heard of anything called D-Wave. And I imagine a lot of the audience out there have got you to thank for putting D-Wave into the public consciousness. So here's Dan Brown, years later, following on from your books, Tony, your groundbreaking books, it would seem, always ahead of the curve, we joke. But here he is, Dan Brown, this best-selling author that everyone's heard of. It's almost as if he's been listening to us, Tony.
I think that he and Elon Musk must be fans of the show because they keep bringing up the topics that you and I have brought up 3 and 4 weeks ahead of time, or in this case, 2013 is when we first broke it out into the public arena. So, it's been out there. Yep. I think they've been paying attention to you, my friend.
It's quite interesting because the car in question is actually a Tesla X. It's one of the sports model, and Elon had hand-delivered this to his friend in the book, obviously a fictional friend, right enough, but it just made me laugh. It was almost as if Dan Brown sits listening, and I'm not saying he does, folks. I would never be that presumptuous or vain to say that.
I'll say he does.
You see, that's why we make quite a good double act, Tony. It really is, We complement each other well.
I'll take the heat, and you can just pose it.
But there you go, folks. We cannot get away from the D-Wave. And like I say, I personally thank Tony for bringing it to my attention. And now as every month goes by, we're hearing more and more and more. And we're kind of going back in time to where we did start all those years ago when Patch met Baker for the first time here after hearing him on the Clyde Lewis show. Because tonight we're going to be making you're going to be making some really, really, in my opinion, Tony, important connections that the listeners really need to know.
Well, that's true. And again, Friday, when you and I got together, we talked about the CERN to D-Wave connection, and we brought up the article that came out in Futurism that we decided was or labeled as the smoking gun, that definitively in this Futurism.com article laid out the connection between the quantum computing of D-Wave and the search for the Higgs boson at CERN. Now, what they did in this article was they outlined that they were simply utilizing D-Wave's quantum computers to reconfirm the assertion by CERN that they had in fact discovered the Higgs boson back in 2012. So,
but tonight, Tony, we're going to be getting into a whole number of topics. But before we get there, for any of the listeners out there, if you want to check out more of Anthony's work, and he comes to us with a vast knowledge base of all things scientific, and in particular, CERN and quantum computers. He's got a number of books out as well, and you can find them over at his website, www.anthonypatch.com. Now, the website is going through a much needed, and I'm telling you, it's looking great, uplift, facelift, whatever you want to call it. It's a work in progress, but anthonypatch.com, and also that is where you can get a hold of Entangled magazine as well. And tonight I found a really good place for us to kick off proceedings, because I've made no secret of the fact that I'm reading Dan Brown's new book called Origin. And I'm telling you, this reads like something out of all the shows myself and Anthony and Johnny and the Freaky Friday crew and everyone on the network has done such a great job when it comes to covering the topics of AI and science and religion. Well, I'm a slow kind of reader. I'm halfway through this book now, and page 210, something interesting turned up, and I want to share that with all of you out there, because I often laugh and joke about how even when we try to unwind and unplug from this matrix as it is, steal a quiet hour to ourselves here or there, it just seems to be that the information follows you. Maybe it's synchronicity. Maybe it's because it's in our consciousness, we notice it more. Maybe it was always there in the first place. But Dan Brown, and I love his writing style, and this won't give away any of the plot for any of the book, which I urge you all to read. And just to read this here, it says, as she led the way down the jet's staircase, Ambra breathed deeply, trying to clear her head. The second glass of wine had taken hold, and she regretted drinking it. Stepping down onto the cement floor of the hangar, she faltered slightly and felt Langdon's strong hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Thanks, she whispered, smiling back at the professor, whose 2 cups of coffee had left him looking wide awake and wired. We should get out of sight as quickly as possible, Langdon said, eyeing the sleek black SUV parked in the corner. I assume this is the vehicle that you told me about. She nodded. Edmund's secret love. That's an odd license plate. Ambra eyed the car's vanity plate and chuckled. And on that plate it said, E-wave. Well, she explained, Edmund told me that Google and NASA recently acquired a groundbreaking supercomputer called D-Wave, one of the world's first quantum computers. He tried to explain it to me, but it was all pretty complicated. Something about superpositions and quantum mechanics and creating an entirely new...
That's the essence of the article, but just the simple fact that the two are openly now being presented as collaborating goes back several months to when you and I first broke the story of the Boltzmann machine being presented at CERN by D-Wave, and that D-Wave were moving towards the utilization, or I should more accurately say, the revelation, because it's been ongoing, the revelation that D-Wave utilizes a Boltzmann machine. Now, that's a mathematical machine. It's not a mechanical machine, but it's referred to as a Boltzmann machine. And as we've outlined, that has to do with recursive neural network, deep machine learning. Now, coming back to CERN and D-Wave, I've written a couple of articles in fact, several articles about D-Wave in the November issue of Entangled magazine, which will be out on the 1st. And one of the articles is the CERN to D-Wave connection that I just mentioned. Now, the second one, and this probably needs a drum roll, but this is brand new. I shared it with you before the show, Kev, and it is something that you and I sort of hinted at the very first show that we did together right after I was on with Clyde Lewis, as you mentioned. And that is another connection between CERN and D-Wave that no one, to my knowledge, publicly has ever made. So take it away.
Oh, no, Tony, I am never going to steal your thunder on this one, because you were the one that taught all of us back in the day when we were learning all of this for the first time that when we talk about CERN or we talk about D-Wave, never lose sight of the fact that the two go together. So you were the one that first laid out that there would be this connection come the opening of the portal. So I have to give you full credit for leading us up to that rabbit hole in the first place. And when you were describing the actual process of the qubits back at the time, and I briefly looked into how D-Wave works, and then you were describing just what happens in the main ring at CERN, I think I jokingly threw out to you that it's almost as if they're trying to go quantum. Tony, give the listeners the hard truth about what you've discovered or what you're laying out in your latest article.
Well, this is why you and I make such a good team, Kev, is because you're very sharp with the physics and you understand what it is that I'm talking about, and you do your own research and come to your own conclusions that you share with me that I haven't come up with. And so the collaboration between us, if you will, the coalescence, to borrow an old word we've used a lot, is remarkable because we literally operate on the same page, but we oftentimes come up with independent discoveries. This is not so much independent as it is building upon your statement about the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, being quantum.
This is the Kev Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions. Deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone out there. Welcome to tonight's Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, right here on your number one network, Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Now, if you're in the UK, we're obviously going to be at the earlier time of 9 p.m. for the next week, maybe 2 weeks, until the American clocks go back. We have to remember that TFR, the brilliant TFR, is based over in the brilliant US of A. So with us putting our clocks back over the weekend, winter time again over here, folks, that means we're going to be on at this earlier time. So with that out the way, with the change of the clocks, went out today to go to the shop, and I am telling you, winter is already here. It was unbelievably cold over here today. And I was reading over the weekend that Snowmageddon, or I don't know what they're calling it, Snowpocalypse, is due to be hitting the UK anytime soon because of cold weather coming down from the Arctic region. Well, I'm telling you, going by the feel of it out there today, it was already here because it's freezing. So if you are in Scotland or the UK, wrap up warm, folks, because that temperature is dipping. But tonight, hopefully, we'll raise the temperature right here on the show because returning after far, far too long. Okay, we done a show on Friday, but that's not the point. Mr. Anthony Patch is back here joining us tonight. And before we get into things, How are you doing, Mr. Patch? Raring to go, I hope?
Oh, yeah, very good. I'm sorry I'm on my laptop tonight, but yeah, raring to go. Things are good. And yeah, we're going to fall back here, I don't know, in a week or two, like you said. But great to be with you on your earlier hour.
So does it ever get cold where you are over there, Tony? I mean, does the temperature ever dip at all?
Oh, sure. We got a lot of dips over here.
Well, I think you should come over here to experience one of our ever cold winters, because I am telling you, it's like something like Game of Thrones is coming. The long winter is almost upon us. I sound like an article out of the Daily Express. I've probably been reading that newspaper way too much.